Welcome, curious minds, to another edition of The Deep Dive. This is the show that, well, cuts through the noise and the sheer information overload to bring you the most vital insights from today's critical topics. I'm Pi, your guide, and with my counterpart, we leverage advanced insights to bring you the deep dive, meticulously crafted every single day.
And I'm Nick, here to help connect those dots and explore the deeper implications of the world unfolding around us. We're driven by an insatiable curiosity about current events and their profound impacts on your life.
Today, we are embarking on a really deep dive into a topic that might just be humanity's greatest, albeit maybe stealthiest threat: the future economics of population. We're looking at the fundamental role population plays in shaping not just economies, but, well, the very structure of governments all around the world. Now imagine this for a second. What if we told you that the real doomsday scenario isn't, say, climate change or nuclear war or even runaway AI, but something far more quietly insidious, a silent shift happening right under our noses? I'm talking about our quietly shrinking populations. It sounds completely counterintuitive, doesn't it? After decades, literally decades, of hearing about overpopulation, this reversal is something truly profound and honestly widely overlooked.
It's a fantastic setup, actually, because it completely flips the script on what so many of us have been taught to expect, right? Our mission today is really to unpack exactly why this demographic decline matters so much, what's causing it, how it's beginning to fundamentally reshape the financial system, from the ground up, and maybe most importantly, what all of this means for your future. Because this isn't just a fleeting trend or like a temporary blip on the economic radar. No, this is a deep structural shift. Understanding it is absolutely crucial for navigating the decades to come, for your finances, your career, even your community.
It really is a structural shift. Let's just jump right into this fascinating reversal of expectations then. Because for generations, our collective understanding of humanity's future has been profoundly shaped by, well, one core assumption. For as long as most of us can remember, humanity has been conditioned, really, to think of continuous population growth as the absolute norm, the default setting. We've even been taught to fear its excesses, haven't we? I mean, it wasn't that long ago, was it, that the whole concept of the population bomb dominated our collective anxieties? We heard about it in school, saw it in documentaries. It was just a recurring theme everywhere.
You've hit on something crucial there, that idea of the population bomb. There's a very real, very widespread fear for decades, especially from the mid-20th century onwards. You think back to books like Paul Ehrlich's The Population Bomb in '68. It warned of mass starvation due to overpopulation. Or that really influential Limits to Growth report from the Club of Rome in 1972 that projected global collapse if growth just kept going unchecked. People genuinely worried about an overcrowded planet, one where resources, food, water, energy would be stretched to breaking point, leading to famine, environmental catastrophe, maybe even societal collapse. It was a narrative that just permeated everything: popular culture, academic circles, even government policy. It convinced us that too many people was the ultimate problem.
It certainly felt like an undeniable truth for such a long time. But here's where it gets, well, really interesting and frankly a bit unsettling. As it turns out, those past fears, while probably well-intentioned, they fundamentally missed something critical. The real crisis facing humanity, it seems, isn't endless growth or overpopulation. It's the exact opposite. Global populations are actually shrinking, and doing so faster than most people realize. The critical insight here, I think, is that our societal models, our economic models, they're still largely built on an assumption of continuous, robust growth, an assumption that's just not valid anymore. And this creates a fundamental disconnect, one we're only just beginning to confront. It's such a stark contrast, almost ironic compared to the anxieties of the last century. We've completely pivoted.
That's a really powerful observation because the data, when you look at it, paints a truly startling picture. It challenges those deeply ingrained historical expectations.
Yeah.
According to recent revised projections from, esteemed institutions like the European Commission and renowned medical journals like The Lancet, the global population is now set to peak significantly sooner and at a lower figure than we previously thought. So instead of reaching, say, a staggering 12 billion people by 2100, which was a common projection just a few years back, new estimates suggest we'll peak around 9.7 billion, maybe by the 2060s, followed by a sharp, significant decline from there. This isn't just a minor tweak in the numbers, it's a fundamental reevaluation of humanity's long-term trajectory. It's predicting an eventual global population contraction that will reshape, well, everything.
And while that might sound surprising, maybe particularly if you're still picturing a constantly expanding global population, It becomes much clearer when you consider what's already happening on the ground in several parts of the world, right? It's not just a theoretical future anymore.
Not at all. We have what you might call canaries in the coal mine, already showing us precisely how this trend unfolds. They offer a glimpse into the future for the rest of the developed world. Japan, for instance. It's been the proverbial canary, experiencing a shrinking populace for decades now. The long-term implications, they're visibly playing out there first. You see a rapidly aging workforce, entire villages emptying out, schools closing because there just aren't enough children. Enormous strain on social services that were designed for a younger, growing population. The average age in Japan is now over 48. That's one of the highest globally. It just highlights the profound societal transformation that comes with sustained decline. Then you look at South Korea. Its birth rate is, frankly, shockingly low. It's currently standing at around 0.72 births per woman. Now, to put that into perspective, that's dramatically less than half of what's needed to simply maintain its current population size. And it's the lowest rate ever recorded for any country, ever. The city of Seoul is already grappling with declining school enrollments. Projections suggest that by 2050, over 40% of its population will be over 65. The government there has poured billions into incentives, baby bonuses, childcare subsidies, you name it, but the trend just continues. It shows just how difficult this is to reverse once it's entrenched.
And it's not just isolated cases over in Asia, is it? Many European countries like Italy and Spain, they're not far behind. Their fertility rates are consistently hovering below 1.4. In Italy, for example, the number of births hit an all-time low just recently. You hear stories about villages and rural areas offering homes for like €1 just to try and attract new residents. But even those efforts, they really struggle against the tide of this demographic reality. And just to give you some context, for a population to maintain its size without immigration, it needs a birth rate of roughly 2.1 children per woman. That's what we call the replacement rate. These numbers we're seeing in Japan, South Korea, much of Europe, they are far, far below that crucial benchmark. It indicates a sustained, probably accelerating decline.
Even China, the country that, for so long, held the title of the world's most populous nation, is now shrinking. This marks a monumental demographic shift, something that was almost unimaginable just a few years ago, especially after decades of the one-child policy and then its relaxation. Its population declined in both 2022 and 2023, and that trend is only projected to accelerate. The long-term consequences for its economic growth, which has historically relied so heavily on that vast labor force, are just immense. Now, it is important to acknowledge while some regions like sub-Saharan Africa and parts of South Asia are still seeing population increases, their growth rates are also beginning to slow down. In the grand scheme of things, it probably isn't long until they too begin to experience demographic declines. The momentum feels global. What's crystal clear right now, though, is that the West in particular is in big trouble, facing these challenges head-on, perhaps sooner and more acutely than others. The developed world is aging rapidly, its productive workforce is shrinking, and this is creating just unprecedented economic and social pressures.
It's an almost complete inversion of that historical narrative, isn't it? From a population bomb to a population bust. And the reasons behind it are, well, they're multifaceted. They stretch across economic, social, cultural realms. This isn't just one single cause, but a really complex interplay of forces. Hashtag tag tag two. Unpacking the drivers of demographic decline. So if the world isn't facing an explosion of people, but maybe more like a slow-motion implosion, what's driving this unprecedented collapse in population growth? Well, the first and perhaps most straightforward reason is simply economics. Put plainly, having children has become prohibitively expensive for many, many families. It's a rational decision, perhaps, even if it's a heartbreaking one for many couples.
Absolutely. The costs associated with raising a family have just soared dramatically over the past few decades, far outstripping wage growth in most places. We're talking about housing, which has become incredibly unaffordable in so many urban and even suburban areas. It forces young couples to delay buying a home or live in much smaller spaces. Then there's the escalating cost of childcare. In many developed countries, it can actually rival or even exceed mortgage payments or college tuition. That makes it financially prohibitive for one parent to stay home or for both to work, without a huge chunk of their income just vanishing into care costs. Quality education, too. From preschool all the way through higher ed, it represents another massive financial burden. Parents are increasingly stressed by the thought of college debt for their children, or just the sheer cost of providing a good educational foundation. And let's not forget healthcare costs. They just seem to climb relentlessly year after year, adding another layer of financial anxiety for families. These combined expenses have simply soared beyond the reach of average families, turning what used to be, a natural life progression into something of a luxury item.
It's a staggering reality, isn't it? The U.S. Department of Agriculture used to track this, and more recent private estimates show that the average cost of raising just one child to adulthood, birth to age 18, now exceeds $310,000 for a middle-income family. And that's before college. It doesn't even account for the indirect costs, like a parent leaving the workforce or reducing hours. And here's the kicker. While these costs have been spiraling upwards, real wages for many people have barely moved for decades. You can see the disconnect so clearly. Living costs surging year after year, yet the income needed to cover those costs is just not keeping pace. So honestly, it's little wonder fewer people feel financially secure enough to raise families, is it? The economic calculus just doesn't add up for so many prospective parents. It leads to delayed family formation or simply fewer children overall.
And beyond the purely economic factors, we're also seeing these profound shifts in social dynamics. Modern lifestyles. People simply aren't forming relationships and families like they used to. There's a rising tide of social isolation that plays a significant role in this demographic decline. It's not just a feeling either, it's backed up by data. Surveys have revealed some really striking insights. Around half of Americans, for instance, report having fewer than 3 close friends, and more than 10% they report having no close friends at all. This isn't just about personal preference, it indicates a much broader erosion of community bonds. Social cohesion seems to be weakening.
That's a powerful point. Those community bonds, which were once so central to forming relationships and families, things like local churches, community centers, neighborhood gatherings, they've largely dissolved. Instead of these strong local networks that naturally brought people together, fostering connections, making it easier to meet potential partners, we often find ourselves immersed in digital connections. And these digital connections, ironically, can leave many feeling even more disconnected and lonely in their real lives, despite having, a vast online network. It's a strange paradox of our hyper-connected age.
And we really can't overstate social media's complex impact here, especially on relationship building, which feeds into this isolation. While it seemingly expands our social circles, lets us connect with people across the globe. The reality is, it seems to have made forming deep, lasting, committed relationships harder, not easier. Today, individuals aren't just competing with people in their local area for partnership. They're, in a sense, competing with everyone on the planet. This unprecedented competition fosters a mindset where individuals feel constant pressure to seek something or someone better, always believing there might be a more ideal partner just a swipe or click away. This continuous search, fueled by these curated highlight reels and the illusion of infinite choice, often erodes the patience and effort required for real, long-term relationships to flourish. It sets unrealistic expectations, frankly, making the messy, imperfect reality of human connection seem less appealing by comparison.
It's a profound shift, certainly, one with many layers. And on top of these social changes, we've also seen evolving gender roles and workforce dynamics play a significant part. On the one hand, the shifts that have led to increased female workforce participation have brought, long overdue social progress, empowering women, expanding opportunities, diversifying our economy. That's all good. But on the other hand, these changes have had unintended economic consequences that contribute to demographic decline, that create new dilemmas for families.
Precisely. One of the most critical economic impacts is that for many households, 2 incomes became necessary where previously one was sufficient. What was once maybe a choice for additional financial security or career fulfillment has, for many, become a requirement. Just to maintain a reasonable standard of living, especially with those soaring costs, this places immense financial and emotional strain on working parents. They're trying to juggle demanding careers, navigate the exorbitant costs and logistics of childcare, manage all the other responsibilities that come with raising a family. It often feels like playing a game of financial and logistical whack-a-mole. It simply makes family expansion a far more challenging proposition than it once was, pushing many to delay having kids or limit the number they have.
And finally, layered on top of all these factors is this pervasive sense of uncertainty, pessimism about the future. It's not just about today's challenges, but what people project for tomorrow. More and more people are simply deterred from starting families due to growing concerns about the environment, widespread economic instability, and just a general societal pessimism that paints a pretty bleak picture of the coming decades.
These anxieties, unfortunately, are often amplified by social media and sensationalist mainstream media. It creates this deep, widespread worry about the viability of raising children in today's world. When individuals look at the future, they often see a landscape of potential challenges: climate change, political instability, economic precarity, maybe even the perceived threat of AI taking jobs rather than opportunities. This leads many to rationally question whether it's responsible or fair or even safe to bring children into such a world. These aren't trivial concerns. They are deeply felt anxieties that shape fundamental life decisions, making the choice to start a family feel like a burden rather than a joy for many.
So we have this kind of perfect storm, don't we? Escalating economic pressures, deep social disconnection, evolving lifestyles, general pessimism, all conspiring to drive down birth rates globally. It's a complex, multifaceted challenge. But what do these profound demographic shifts mean for our broader financial systems? Because as it turns out, the implications for how our economies are structured are, well, nothing short of seismic. Hashtag tag 3. The seismic impact on our financial systems. This brings us to a rather uncomfortable truth, doesn't it? Our entire financial system fundamentally depends on continuous population growth. This dependency is particularly evident in crucial social safety nets, like pensions. If you think about it, traditional government-backed pension systems rely on younger workers paying into the system today to fund retirement benefits for older generations. It's a pretty straightforward generational transfer of wealth, where each generation basically supports the last.
That's the fundamental mechanism, yes. And this arrangement works okay, or at least it did, as long as there's a steady and ideally growing influx of younger workers entering the workforce, paying taxes, contributing to the system. But here's where it gets really interesting and deeply concerning. What happens when this younger contributing population starts shrinking substantially? The entire premise just begins to unravel. It reveals the inherent fragility of these systems.
And this is where that analogy gets really stark. If you've looked into this before, you might know that pension schemes worldwide, Europe, the US, Japan, they essentially operate like giant Ponzi schemes.
Yeah.
Now, that's a loaded term, okay? And that's not to say they are intentionally fraudulent, but it highlights a stark reality. These aren't traditional savings accounts where your money sits waiting for you. Governments have, in many cases, already spent most of the pension contributions that today's retirees paid in decades ago on other things. So these pension systems depend entirely on new generations of workers contributing each year just to sustain payouts to current retirees. The core insight from this sort of Ponzi scheme reality is that relying solely on traditional government-backed pensions is becoming an increasingly high-risk strategy. It makes individual proactivity in retirement planning not just advisable, but essential. Without that new money coming in from new workers, the whole structure becomes unstable. It's reliant on ever larger numbers of future contributors that simply aren't materializing.
That's a critical point. And this demographic reality presents governments with a truly difficult choice. A terrible bind, really. With declining populations and fewer new workers entering the workforce, their options are unenviable and politically explosive. Option 1. Drastically raise taxes on the shrinking workforce. But this risks severe economic backlash, stifles economic activity, and basically invites voter revolt. Option 2. Drastically cut pensions for retirees, a move that would almost certainly trigger enormous social unrest among a large and politically active segment of the population, leading to mass protests, maybe even electoral defeat. Neither option is palatable, especially for elected officials who operate on pretty short political cycles.
Exactly. So instead of making these politically fraught choices directly, many governments are quietly turning to what you might call stealth tactics. These are alternative, less visible solutions, primarily financial repression and mass immigration, both designed to sort of defer the crisis rather than solve it head on.
Let's unpack financial repression first. It's a concept many might not immediately recognize, but it profoundly impacts your wallet, your savings. It essentially involves holding interest rates artificially below inflation levels. What this does over time is it erodes your savings purchasing power. It acts as an invisible tax. For governments, this is incredibly beneficial. It enables them to take on more debt and manage these ballooning pension liabilities without openly defaulting or raising taxes overtly. It's a way to quietly transfer wealth from savers to the state. You experience this when your bank savings account or your fixed income investments yield less than the rate of inflation. Your money is quietly losing value, even if the number in your account stays the same or goes up slightly.
And this isn't some distant theoretical possibility. It's already unfolding. Japan is the clearest, snarkest warning for the rest of us. It currently has the world's oldest population, more retirees than active workers. That puts enormous strain on its pension system. Its pension obligations are soaring, and public debt has reached well over 250% of GDP. It's staggering. Unable to significantly raise taxes or slash pensions without risking social turmoil, the Japanese government is increasingly resorting to financial repression. They are quietly transferring wealth from savers to the government by rapidly inflating away the currency and the value of social obligations like pensions. Think about Japanese citizens with significant cash savings or fixed income investments. They've seen their real wealth just slowly vanish. Their yen might technically hold its value, but its purchasing power for goods and services has been steadily eroded by this quiet inflation. It acts as a backdoor tax, fueling government spending and managing their debt.
And here's the critical takeaway for you, the listener. If you think Japan is somehow unique in this situation, think again. Europe and North America. They are on remarkably similar trajectories, just delayed by maybe a few years, a decade perhaps. We are seeing these same pressures emerge and the same quiet tactics being deployed. Your savings could face the same invisible tax if governments continue down this path.
Meanwhile, the other main strategy increasingly used by Western governments has been to rely on mass immigration as a kind of temporary fix. The idea is to bring in younger workers from abroad to help sustain the pension Ponzi scheme for just a little longer, bolstering the tax base, increasing contributions to social security systems. On the surface, this appears to be a straightforward solution to labor shortages and pension funding gaps.
However, using immigration as a strategy to manage demographic decline isn't straightforward at all. It comes with significant political and social consequences. An increasing reliance on immigration, just to sustain pension systems, has begun to trigger significant political backlash. Public resentment towards immigration policies has surged across countries worldwide. It's fueling political polarization, the growth of nationalist movements. We see it everywhere. Many European governments in particular are struggling to balance economic necessity with social stability as voters increasingly resist immigration-driven policies. We see this tension playing out in elections and policy debates. It creates a deeply complex and divisive issue that is far, far from a simple economic solution. The social fabric gets strained, even as the economic need might grow.
Okay, so if raising taxes is too risky politically, cutting pensions causes unrest, financial repression is this slow burn tax, and mass immigration is politically contentious, how else can governments maintain pension payouts and just keep the wheels turning? Well, unfortunately, when all other options become unpalatable or just insufficient, the answer often boils down to simply more debt.
That's right. Governments continue to issue more debt in the form of bonds to fund these pension liabilities. They're effectively continually kicking the problem down the road, borrowing from the future to pay for today's obligations.
Yeah.
But issuing bonds means governments need buyers for those bonds. Without enough willing buyers in the open market, or if interest rates rise too high, making borrowing too expensive, governments are sometimes forced to pressure banks, pension funds, and insurance companies into buying these bonds, often at yields lower than inflation. This, once again, is another insidious form of financial repression, compelling institutions to absorb government debt even when it's not economically attractive. It further distorts markets and quietly erodes returns for their own clients, like you.
And perhaps even more concerning is the potential impact of these demographic shifts on asset prices, particularly in the stock market. You see, today's pension funds are heavily invested in stocks, often passively through automated index funds. They are, in a sense, price-insensitive buyers that have just been reliably pouring money into markets for years. It's earned them the nickname large mindless robots in some financial circles.
Yeah, this price-insensitive behavior from pension funds has been a consistent, powerful driver of market growth for decades. It's underpinned many bull markets. However, with a shrinking pool of young workers contributing, pension funds will inevitably experience reduced inflows over time. It's simple math. As more people retire and draw down their pensions and fewer new workers contribute, the historical flood of capital into these funds will slow to a trickle. Eventually, it could even reverse into net outflows. This will eventually slow or even reverse the massive streams of money historically flowing into large stock indexes. Over time, major stock markets, which are heavily dependent on continuous growth, consumer spending, these huge inflows could face severe downward pressure. And the direct consequence for individuals like you, falling asset prices mean shrinking pension payouts, potentially triggering economic pain for the millions of retirees who depend on these investments for their livelihoods, for their security. It's a potential chain reaction with profound personal implications, affecting everything from your 401k or equivalent to your overall retirement plans.
Wow. Okay, while that scenario might sound pretty grim, it's also quietly setting the stage for a remarkable and perhaps unexpected shift in economic power dynamics. It's what we're calling the Great Rotation, a potentially seismic shift from capital back towards labor, one that could fundamentally redefine who holds the cards in the global economy going forward. For decades, really, the global economy has been firmly in the hands of capital. When we say capital, we're talking about, big investors, major corporations, the ultra wealthy. Their interests, their dominance came from a kind of perfect storm of factors: an abundant global labor supply, increasingly globalized markets, allowing them to move production anywhere, and the relentless pursuit of efficiency, which often meant outsourcing work to wherever it was cheapest,
Yeah,
often
yeah.
with minimal regulations or worker protections.
To fully grasp this, let's quickly recap how that dominance was cemented, right? For the last several decades, corporations very deftly leveraged globalization to keep wages suppressed. They aggressively sought out the lowest labor costs globally, moving factories abroad, tapping into these vast pools of workers in developing nations, effectively making labor markets truly global. This meant workers, particularly in developed nations, found themselves with very little bargaining power. If they demanded higher wages, well, their jobs could potentially just be shipped overseas. As a result, wages barely budged in real terms for many people, even as productivity soared thanks to technology. Meanwhile, corporate profits reached unprecedented highs. This created a massive, sustained imbalance, heavily favoring capital over labor. The owners of capital just reaped disproportionate rewards from economic growth.
But now, demographic collapse is fundamentally changing this dynamic. It's turning that abundance of labor into a scarcity. It's a shift that will redefine the economic landscape, potentially for generations. Fewer births mean fewer young workers entering the workforce each year, a smaller pool of new talent coming in. At the same time, that massive cohort of baby boomers, who once formed the core of the labor market, are retiring in record numbers every single day. This is a dual squeeze: fewer new workers coming in, more experienced workers going out. Suddenly, corporations find themselves competing fiercely for fewer available workers. The abundant supply of cheap labor that underpinned decades of capital dominance is rapidly beginning to disappear. And with it, the power dynamic is shifting.
And this phenomenon isn't just theoretical either. It's already unfolding in real time, giving us a clear leading indicator. Japan, once again, offers a really vivid glimpse into our likely future. Due to severe labor shortages driven by its aging population, wages there have surged dramatically after decades of stagnation. It's quite remarkable. We've seen some Japanese companies facing critical staff shortages increase salaries by nearly 10% in a single year. That's huge. Even more striking, employees who switched jobs, leveraging their in-demand skills, gained raises averaging over 40%. Can you imagine? And it's crucial to understand, companies aren't doing this out of generosity or some sudden philanthropic impulse. They're doing it to survive. They literally have no choice but to pay up, offer better benefits, or significantly improve working conditions. Or they risk losing their workforce entirely, which leads to shrinking operations and unfulfilled orders. It's existential for them.
That's a powerful incentive, absolutely. And it's a trend we really need to pay close attention to. Japan is just the beginning here. Similar trends are quietly emerging across developed nations in Europe and North America. After decades of wage stagnation, employees in many Western countries now have increasing leverage in the job market, especially in sectors needing specialized skills. We're seeing more job hopping for higher pay, greater demands for flexible work arrangements, a renewed focus on employee well-being. These are all direct consequences of this demographic crunch. The power dynamic, slowly but surely, feels like it's swinging back towards labor.
You might wonder about those traditional solutions, like increased immigration. Well, this growing leverage for workers is also why many Western nations have recently accelerated immigration policies, hoping to mitigate these labor shortages. Yet, immigration is no longer the easy solution it once was, for a couple of reasons. Crucially, major outsourcing hubs like China and India are now facing their own demographic challenges. Their birth rates are declining, their populations are aging too. This further shrinks the global labor pool. What this means is that companies can no longer simply move production overseas or bring in cheap labor from abroad without running into demographic walls elsewhere. That global well of readily available, cheap labor is drying up. It eliminates what was once a primary lever for capital to suppress wages.
Okay, so with globalization's labor advantages diminishing, what about the other things? The silver bullets that corporations are desperately counting on, like automation and AI. Many business leaders are betting big on technology to solve this labor problem. But while artificial intelligence and robotics may eventually reduce the need for some human labor, current technologies are nowhere near advanced enough to meaningfully replace the complex roles many workers fill, especially roles requiring creativity, critical thinking, emotional intelligence, or highly nuanced physical dexterity. Think healthcare, education, skilled trades. We're just not at the point where AI can universally step in to fill every labor gap, especially for highly skilled or personalized tasks, meaning the demand for human talent remains strong, perhaps even stronger.
Which brings us back to that difficult choice corporations now face. Adapt to higher wages and better conditions or face shrinking operations and declining profits. It's becoming that stark. Decades of capital dominance conditioned them to prioritize profits above all else, often explicitly at the expense of labor costs. Squeezing wages was the name of the game. But now, sustaining profits requires investing heavily in their workforces and providing better wages, conditions, and benefits. It's becoming a prerequisite for success. Once labor scarcity becomes the norm, the old playbook of suppressing wages no longer works. It's just not viable. Higher wages and improved working conditions become entrenched, effectively shifting power firmly back to workers for an extended period. Oh, cool. In other words, demographic collapse is inadvertently leveling the economic playing field for labor in ways we haven't seen in generations. It's marking a profound rebalance.
It's a monumental shift, and it suggests a really fascinating feedback loop towards rebalance that could, maybe eventually, help stabilize these population trends. As wages rise and job security improves due to labor scarcity, family formation becomes financially viable again, or at least more viable. Higher salaries, better benefits. They mean more families can afford children, can more easily manage childcare costs, achieve a stable home life, which could potentially begin to reverse some of the demographic decline we've been discussing, though probably very slowly.
And at the same time, an interesting counter-effect occurs. Increased family formation temporarily tightens labor markets further. As parents, especially women perhaps, exit the workforce to raise families, or maybe opt for reduced hours, it impacts labor supply again. This creates a fascinating cycle, doesn't it? Rising wages encourage family formation, which leads to further labor shortages, which in turn drives wages even higher, until eventually, maybe, labor markets rebalance and stabilize. This feedback loop suggests a kind of natural, albeit slow, adjustment process where societal priorities might shift back towards supporting families more directly, simply out of economic necessity.
It's important to emphasize, though, that while the economic pendulum is now clearly swinging back towards labor, these major shifts unfold gradually, taking decades to fully materialize. We are still only in the early stages of this transition. It might be many years, even decades, before we truly emerge from this demographic crisis and achieve a stable new equilibrium. It's a long game for sure, but the direction of travel seems clear. Workers are gaining power, and that has profound implications for the future of our entire economic system.
This all brings us to the really big question, doesn't it? Can the current financial system, specifically capitalism as we know it, adapt to this profound demographic shift? Throughout its history, capitalism has proven remarkably resilient. It's consistently adapted to disruption, reinvented itself in the face of every new crisis, technological, financial, political, and usually emerged stronger each time. It's an economic model known for its flexibility, its capacity for transformation, constantly seeking new markets, new efficiencies.
Absolutely, it's been incredibly robust, evolving through the agricultural age, the industrial age, the information age. However, the demographic storm we're entering today is unlike any challenge capitalism has faced before. It feels fundamentally different because, as you know, capitalism fundamentally thrives on growth. Continuous expansion is its lifeblood. It requires more workers to produce goods and services, more consumers to buy them, and an ever-growing market to fuel investment and innovation. With global population shrinking, we're losing this crucial engine of economic prosperity. It undermines a foundational assumption that has driven centuries of capitalist expansion.
And this isn't just another economic downturn, like a financial crisis or an inflationary episode or a recession, all of which tend to be cyclical, right? They come and go. This demographic shift is structural, long-term, and profoundly different. It's not a temporary blip that will correct itself in a few years. No, it's a foundational change to the very conditions under which capitalism has historically operated. It means a permanent shift in demand, supply, and the underlying dynamics of labor and capital. It forces a fundamental rethink of how our economies function.
Adding to this vulnerability, many modern corporations, especially those huge tech giants, Apple, Google, Amazon, they seem to have gradually moved away from genuine, groundbreaking innovation towards what some observers call a rent extraction model, or even techno-feudalism. They often generate enormous profits not from pioneering new products or services, but from dominating markets and extracting rents due to their sheer scale. This isn't always about creating new value, but rather about controlling marketplaces, controlling access, and charging fees for that access. Think of major app stores or e-commerce platforms taking a significant cut from every transaction simply because they control access to a vast user base.
Exactly. And this approach worked extremely effectively when populations and markets were expanding steadily. It could mask a fundamental stagnation behind impressive short-term profits, derived simply from market dominance. But without demographic growth to continuously fuel these expanding markets with new users, new consumers, these companies face a stark new reality. They must innovate meaningfully, create genuine new value, or risk prolonged stagnation. Their existing models, which thrived on continuous expansion and network effects, become much less sustainable in a shrinking world. You can't just keep extracting more from a dwindling base indefinitely.
And beyond corporate dynamics, this demographic shift profoundly reshapes consumer behavior itself. Aging populations don't just spend less overall, they spend differently. Younger populations are typically the drivers of consumer spending, buying new homes, cars, gadgets, services as they start families and careers. Older consumers, however, typically reduce discretionary spending. They shift their expenditures towards essentials like healthcare, pharmaceuticals, retirement-related services, things needed for that stage of life. This structural shift in consumer demand directly challenges businesses built around traditional consumption growth models, models that rely on a constant, broad-based consumer expansion for their growth. Think of the massive impact on industries from, say, fashion to automotive, which are often designed for a younger, more acquisitive demographic.
Then there's the issue of productivity, which has historically been capitalism's ace in the hole, really. While historically, rising productivity has offset declining population growth in some cases, enabling continued prosperity despite demographic headwinds, today productivity growth in many developed nations has stalled significantly. The great irony here is that this slowdown in productivity growth coincides precisely with a period when transformative innovations are needed the most to counter this demographic crunch. If we can't get more output from fewer workers, then economic growth will inevitably slow, amplifying the effects of population decline.
Moreover, the demographic shift exacerbates another major structural economic vulnerability: consumer debt. As real wages stagnate for many and living costs soar, households increasingly rely on credit just to make ends meet, not necessarily to invest or thrive, but just to get by. Total consumer debt has already reached record highs, exceeding $18 trillion in the United States alone, with credit card debt surpassing $1 trillion. It's mind-boggling. Many families now depend on debt simply to cover daily expenses from groceries to housing. And a shrinking consumer base, a declining workforce. This makes this level of debt increasingly unsustainable. It further threatens economic stability. This isn't just about individual households, it's a systemic vulnerability that could cascade through the financial system. Fewer young workers means fewer tax revenues to support an aging, potentially debt-laden consumer base.
So, to survive this unprecedented demographic storm, capitalism must once again fundamentally reinvent itself. It has to. Governments, for their part, may need to rethink their policies, shifting towards initiatives explicitly designed to support families and stabilize demographics. This isn't just about small incentives here and there. It's about creating a truly supportive ecosystem for raising children. This could involve crucial measures like genuinely affordable housing initiatives, significantly better and more accessible childcare, comprehensive healthcare reform that reduces the burden on families, and generous parental leave policies that allow parents to balance work and family life without facing a huge career penalty. These are systemic changes, not minor tweaks. They're aimed at making family formation economically and socially viable again.
Concurrently, regulators might need to aggressively tackle monopolistic market structures and rent-seeking practices. Quote, redirecting corporate incentives towards genuine innovation rather than mere extraction. This would involve things like serious antitrust actions, potentially breaking up monopolies, fostering truly competitive markets. It would push companies to create real value through R&D, solve pressing societal problems, genuinely innovate, rather than simply profiting from their dominant market positions or by acquiring and stifling potential competitors. It's about shifting from just taking a cut to actually creating something new and valuable.
All of this puts capitalism itself at a truly historic crossroads. If it successfully adapts again, embracing these fundamental changes, this reinvention, the system could emerge stronger, fairer, and more sustainable. It would have proven its resilience in the face of maybe its most unique challenge yet, ushering in an era of perhaps more equitable prosperity and genuine innovation. But if not, if it fails to adapt to a world without continuous population growth, we may face prolonged economic stagnation, instability, and even deeper social and political challenges, reshaping societies, economies, and lives worldwide in potentially negative ways. The stakes are incredibly high.
The choices we as societies make now will really determine the very nature of our future.
Okay, so given these profound and clearly long-term shifts, it seems essential that you proactively prepare for the new demographic and economic reality, rather than just passively waiting to see how things unfold. The next decades will likely look fundamentally different from what we've known before, and the conditions that previously allowed maybe a select few to thrive disproportionately are rapidly changing. This is about taking control where you can, understanding the new landscape.
Indeed, we are now entering an era shaped by labor shortages, rising wages, and a profound shift in economic power dynamics.
Yeah.
As we discussed, this shifting balance between capital and labor directly impacts your leverage as a worker. With fewer workers entering the workforce and those baby boomers retiring in droves, companies must increasingly compete to attract and retain skilled talent. This gives you significantly greater bargaining power than you've likely had before, especially if you have in-demand skills. The job market is becoming in many ways a seller's market for skilled labor.
So understanding your increased value and positioning yourself accordingly is really crucial to thriving in this new reality. This means your career strategy might need a significant upgrade. It's vital to actively invest in yourself. Continuous education, training, skill development. Think about learning new programming languages if you're in tech, mastering advanced data analysis, getting certifications in emerging fields, particularly focus on industries projected to face significant labor shortages. Things like healthcare, skilled trades, engineering, certain tech sectors. That's where your skills will be most in demand and your leverage highest. This continuous self-investment isn't just a nice-to-have recommendation anymore. It feels like a necessity for maintaining relevance and commanding higher wages in this environment.
But successfully navigating this demographic shift isn't only about individual careers. It also creates opportunities for strategic investments that align with these long-term trends. First, consider talent-centric companies. Identify those businesses that genuinely understand and are adapting to the new labor landscape. Those that attract and retain talent by offering competitive wages, truly supportive family policies, flexible working conditions, robust employee development programs. These companies will likely become stronger. They'll benefit from higher productivity, lower worker turnover, and sustained success in a labor-scarce environment. They're essentially future-proofing their workforce, which is a good sign for investors.
Second, keep a close eye on policy-aligned sectors. As governments worldwide increasingly recognize that supporting family formation and an aging population is essential to economic stability, they will respond with targeted policy measures, eventually. This will likely lead to substantial investment in areas like affordable housing initiatives, improved education systems, expanded healthcare services including pharmaceuticals and medical tech, and sophisticated elder care solutions. Sectors aligned with these policies could see substantial investment in growth, making them potentially attractive long-term plays for investors.
Third, geographical diversification becomes even more crucial in this new demographic landscape. Population decline isn't uniform worldwide, right? Its impact will vary dramatically. Some countries and regions will navigate this transition far more successfully than others, maybe through proactive policies or just unique demographic profiles. Nations that proactively support family formation, strategically manage immigration, and maintain relatively balanced demographics are likely to outperform those facing severe demographic challenges. So, diversifying your investments across multiple nations or regions helps mitigate risks concentrated in any single economy. It protects your long-term financial stability. It's about not putting all your eggs in one potentially shrinking demographic basket.
And fourth, embracing active portfolio management becomes arguably more essential. As we've discussed, many pension systems today are heavily invested in stock markets, often passively through broad index funds. As more people retire and fewer new workers contribute, inflows into major stock indexes will inevitably slow, potentially creating downward pressure on those large cap indexes that have benefited so much from this consistent capital flow. Now, while any major market repricing isn't likely to happen overnight, these demographic shifts unfold over many years. It's probably wise to carefully evaluate sectors and companies clearly positioned to benefit from this long-term demographic shift, rather than relying solely on passive broad market exposure that might face significant headwinds down the line. This means doing your homework, identifying potential winners, and not just riding the overall market tide, which might be receding.
Finally, strategic financial planning is absolutely critical, now more than ever. Clearly understand your own long-term financial needs, especially in terms of pensions, retirement, wealth preservation. With traditional government-backed pension systems under enormous stress, it's just prudent to clearly plan for multiple financial scenarios, including ones where government-provided pensions fall short of their promised benefits, or are significantly delayed, or may be taxed more heavily. Diversifying your investments and savings strategy beyond just traditional stocks and bonds, considering alternative retirement solutions, maybe real estate, maybe private equity if appropriate for you, and ensuring flexibility in your financial plans. All of this will greatly enhance your long-term security. While the economic landscape we're entering may be unfamiliar, maybe even a bit daunting, by positioning yourself strategically, staying adaptable, remaining informed, you can clearly transform uncertainty into opportunity. Because even in times of great change, perhaps especially then, knowledge truly is power.
What a journey we've taken today. We've explored these profound demographic shifts, from the complex causes of declining populations economics, social disconnection, you name it, to their really far-reaching economic consequences. Consequences for pensions, asset markets, and that fundamental balance between capital and labor. This is clearly a structural, long-term challenge, demanding adaptation, demanding foresight from governments, corporations, and definitely from individuals like you. It's truly a silent revolution playing out all around us.
And as we conclude this deep dive, maybe consider this. In a world where the very engine of continuous growth is decelerating, where the old rules of prosperity are being rewritten before our eyes, what old assumptions about success, about community, perhaps even about your own personal financial security, what assumptions do you need to challenge and reinvent in your own lives to truly thrive in this new economic reality? This isn't just about abstract economic models. It's about a fundamental reevaluation of how we live, how we work, and how we plan for the future. Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive, where we will continue to explore the most fascinating and critical topics that pique our collective curiosity every single day.